In this final segment, we consider an application of this framework to a pertinent political venue. Here, because I focus on presidential debates in my research, I've chosen a master's thesis project by Tane A. Schroeder, a student at Erasmus University Rotterdam in the field of international public management and policy. This thesis is titled The Social Construction of Target Groups During Presidential Election Debates and What It Takes to Win. As the author notes, there are three approaches to understanding social and political interactions, especially due to their constructive nature. The first is the positivist approach, which mirrors the scientific method by assuming there are laws that explain causal relationships between phenomena. The aim here is for clear evidence that objective and free of value assertions. The second is the interpretive approach, in which reality is socially created through the interactions of people who in turn create and reinforce shared meaning. The final approach, the post-positivist approach, argues that there is an objective reality, but this reality is not fixed, but is evolving and shaped by cultural, political, and social forces. In simpler terms, where you sit is where you stand. The aim of scholars in such a school is to make individuals aware of the meaning, values, and theory that influences how they perceive the objective reality they live in. The author took the approach of considering general election presidential debates to testing partisan differences here in the United States between the Republican and Democratic parties for three reasons. First, the debates allow for direct dialogue between the Democratic Party and Republican Party candidates regarding their values. Because it is a competition, candidates benefit from taking clear stances on issues and even being more outspoken than they normally would in support of these positions. Secondly, viewership of presidential debates is quite extensive due to their relatively and non-prepared context, with more individuals watching debates than any other form of political programming. Finally, exit poll data suggests that voters are more likely to use information from the debates than from any other single factor in their vote choice. The research design and methodology employed by Schroeder in her thesis used a sample selection in which one debate from each of the past 12 electoral cycles, from 1960 until 2016, was randomly selected by the roll of a dice. The coding she carried out was based upon qualitative analysis of transcripts using computer-assisted analysis software, Atlas TI. There is no intercoder reliability, as she coded all debates by herself. With her study, she considers the utterances from the candidate from either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party when they discussed a target group in relation to a policy proposal or by themselves. This was her unit of analysis. The focal category for Schroeder's thesis was whether the group discussed was one of four socially constructed groups from Schneider and Ingram's framework. In other words, was the group discussed by the presidential candidates the advantage? Were they contenders? Were they dependents? Or were they deviants? From there, the nature of the policy proposal provided insight into whether it was beneficial or burdensome and in what realm of policy it belonged. Schroeder's central research question considered how and in what manner are target group populations socially constructed and presented by the Democratic and Republican Party candidates running for presidency. As can be seen in this figure from her thesis, which considers the selected debates from 1960 to 2016, there has been a substantial decrease in the percentage of times the advantage are mentioned, with a concomitant increase in the mentions of contenders and dependents. At the same time, the mentions of the deviants remain substantially muted. Schroeder's testing of her research question expectations led to multiple findings regarding the social construction of populations during these presidential debates. Some ran counter to her expectations. With the advantaged target groups, she expected them to be mentioned less frequently than the contenders, dependents, and deviants, with many benefits packaged as beneficial to the general public and few burdens packaged as benefits. This expectation was not met, as advantaged target groups are not mentioned less frequently than are the other target groups. Furthermore, they do not necessarily receive many beneficial policies in comparison to the other social constructions. Schroeder next expected that the presidential candidates will avoid discussing contending target groups, and when they do so, it will be in a vague and ambiguous manner. This expectation was not met as contenders were mentioned frequently. Politicians make use of contending target groups as a point of comparison and for the definition of other groups. When presidential candidates speak of dependents, Schroeder expected the policy proposals put forward to be symbolic rather than concrete. Her expectation was not met as candidates constructed target groups that are traditionally not seen as dependents to propose beneficial policies. This helps the speaker appeal to a larger group while not limiting their appeal to other groups. Finally, Schroeder expected deviance will be mentioned frequently, but only in the context of burdens. This expectation was not met, as throughout the debates, both parties' candidates preferred to discuss beneficial policy more than burdensome policies. Schroeder's thesis work led her to the conclusion that the advantaged hold dominant position in society almost by definition. As she put it, "In my findings, the vantage point for everything is the advantaged target group. To be constructed as a contender or dependent or deviant is to be constructed as such in comparison to the advantaged." At the same time, there is near constant affirmation of power by the advantaged to maintain their position within society. The deviants of society have their position forcibly asserted upon them through both the valence of their social constructions and their lack of political power to change things. The contenders, for their part, contend with the advantage by having a level of power themselves and having the ability to affect the ideals of others by making their own ideals the norm, not necessarily those considered the norm by the advantaged. In conclusion, Schroeder quotes Schneider and Ingram. Social constructions become central to the strategy of public officials, especially those who are in elected or highly visible positions where they are expected to pay attention to public preferences, because people care intensely not only about what they receive from government, but also what others are receiving as well, and why.